Now on Inside California Politics.
It may be that the Republicans are going to be dominating among the actual voters.
The latest polling numbers suggest it could be a close recall election in September. Why a Newsom victory could hinge on interest from Democrats.
And the California Republican Party is looking to endorse a recall candidate.
We will have new leadership come September 14th.
The candidates that have met the delegate count so far and what the party plans to do to reach undecided voters.
Broadcasting across the Golden State, this is Inside California Politics.
Thank you for watching Inside California Politics. I'm Frank Buckley in Los Angeles.
And I'm Nikki Lorenzo in Sacramento. This week, new polling numbers from the Berkeley Institute of Governmental Studies predict a close election in September, even though only 36% of the state's registered voters say they actually support the recall. That's because the recall election will not be decided by the overall electorate, but only by those who choose to take part in the recall. And according to this poll, the voting preferences of those considered most likely to participate are not in the governor's favor. Berkeley IGS poll director Mark DiCamillo joins us now with the challenges ahead for Governor Newsom.
Mark, your survey suggests that Governor Gavin Newsom is in a real fight here to keep his job. Let's take a look at the numbers. While your survey shows that only 36% of registered voters are ready to recall Governor Gavin Newsom, with 51% opposing it, the number is much tighter when it comes to those voters who are likely to actually vote in the recall. In that category, it's 47% yes to the recall, with 50% no, 3% undecided. Who are those voters that you've identified as likely to vote in this recall, and what does that mean for Governor Newsom?
Right. If everyone were required to vote, the governor really would be comfortably ahead. As you showed, it was 15 points, but about half of our sample, based on their own testimony in terms of their voting intentions, their interest in voting, and their past history of voting in statewide elections, these are the voters that appear to us to be most likely to vote. And it was about half of all the people in our sample. We had almost 6,000 voters in this sample, so about 3,000 of them were considered the most likely to vote, and that's where it's much closer.
You identify a second factor that could be key in this election, and that is expectations. Democrats overwhelmingly think Governor Newsom is going to defeat the recall. What is that number, and how will that impact the election?
Right. We asked voters, and it was huge differences by party preference. Republicans, by a greater than 2-to-1 margin, think that they can recall that the governor will, in fact, be recalled, whereas among Democrats, 80% to about 7%. It's just overwhelmingly one-sided that they think he will survive the recall and win it back. So really the expectations are creating a level of complacency, I think, among Democrats that the situation is not as serious as some think.
Voters have two questions that they'll face. One, yes or no on the recall, whether to recall Governor Newsom. Then question two, who gets your vote to replace him? Let's look at the results in your survey. When it comes to first choice preferences, 40% of voters are undecided. But among those who express a preference, Larry Elder, the radio talk show host, leads with 18%. John Cox and Kevin Faulconer tied at 10%. Kevin Kiley, first choice preference among 5% of those likely to vote in the election. And at 3%, it's YouTuber Kevin Paffrath and reality TV star Caitlyn Jenner. What do you make of those results?
Well, it was a shock to us. I mean, we hadn't heard much about Larry Elder before the final week of, when we were doing our poll. He actually sued the Secretary of State to get his name included on the ballot and got a lot of attention because of that lawsuit. And then he was successful in getting on the ballot. He is now the clear favorite among the voters that we surveyed. But as you say, a huge proportion of voters are undecided. It's a long, long list. It's over 40 candidates that we presented to voters. And so, many voters haven't given much thought to it. In fact, among Democrats, about a quarter of them say they're not going to be voting for any of the candidates in the replacement election. So it may be that the Republicans are going to be dominating among the actual voters on that half of the ballot.
And is that 40% undecided number significant? Is there, what could happen within that number?
Well, that's what we're going to track from here on in. It'll get closer as we get closer to the election, especially after voters get mailed their ballots. In about 2 or 3 weeks, every voter in the state will be mailed a recall election ballot, which will list all the various candidates. They'll get a chance to review it a bit. I think that's when you're going to start to see significant proportions kind of coming to terms with those candidates.
Given that Republicans are clearly more enthusiastic and energized, should the Newsom team be rethinking its strategy on how to defeat the recall?
Well, I'm not in the campaign management business. I just do the nonpartisan polls. I'm certain that they're looking at the results, and they're doing their own polling, I'm sure, where they must be seeing similar kinds of things. So their strategy has to be based on getting the vote out. That has to be part of their strategy, and I'm sure it is. I mean, they have the resources, and they certainly have the talent to do what's needed. But, you know, whether they're going to be successful or not is the issue. And, you know, we'll be polling on it from here into until the election. Our final polls will be done about a week before the election.
And we'll look forward to having you on then. Mark, thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Coming up on Inside California Politics, the California Republican Party is preparing to endorse a recall candidate. Which 3 reached the delegate nomination threshold, and why not all of the candidates support the endorsement process? We're about 6 weeks from the recall election of Governor Newsom. There are 24 Republican candidates officially running, and the California Republican Party is preparing to possibly endorse one of them. California Republican Party Chairwoman Jessica Millan Patterson joins us now with which candidates are eligible for the endorsement, how that process will unfold, and what she's doing to engage undecided voters. Jessica, of course, we have that new poll out this week from Berkeley and the LA Times, pretty much showing what our Inside California Politics poll found. This recall is split, and there are 40% of voters who are undecided. So what are you and the California Republican Party doing to reach those voters?
Our number one priority remains turning out people on question 1 and making sure that we get that recall question across the finish line. We started several months ago with our organization. At the end of in the election last year, we had 42,000 volunteers. We have increased that number by 22,000 since Election Day. So we're up around 64,000 active volunteers that are already contacting, identifying, and finding out ways to persuade. What are the issues that are important to people that will turn them out to vote yes on question 1?
So what are those issues in your eyes?
So what we found from both our research and from talking to voters through our different universes, number 1, people are worried about crime. And we've seen an increase of crime here in California that's really we haven't seen in the last decade. 31% increase in homicides in the last year. People are afraid to go out in their own neighborhoods because of the failed policies of California Democrats and the way that they have put criminals above communities. That's number 1. Parents want their kids back to in-person full-time school. And again, California is the last in the nation when it comes to taking kids and getting them back into school. Next is jobs in the economy. You know, we had $11 billion worth of fraud that we know of, could be as high as $30 billion worth of fraud from our unemployment development department. And this governor, instead of fixing EDD and making sure that real Californians that needed their government's help, sometimes for the first time in their lives, weren't getting a return phone call, he's out there worrying about things that aren't going to affect Californians' everyday lives. When we talk about those types of issues, California voters are listening.
All right, so the governor is going to spend some money touting his accomplishments. It was reported this week that campaign Newsom spent $10 million in a TV ad buy. You know, we're going to probably be seeing that rolling out here very soon. Do you have the resources to match something like that? Because I believe he does have $30 million to spend just on this recall. That's a pretty big war chest. And when you want to win elections, it all comes down to spending money.
Certainly, this governor does have a lot of money in the bank. And after seeing those polls, $10 million would be the bare minimum that I would be spending if I were him. California Republicans are never going to be equally resourced. And what we found in the last election cycle is we don't need to be. We need to be somewhere in the ballpark, but we don't need to be equally resourced. And the reason for that is because we're right on the ideas and we're right on the issues. The number one thing that we have going for us is Gavin Newsom. And if he continues to govern the way that he has been over the last 3 years, then this recall is going to be done and we will have new leadership come September 14th.
Next weekend, California Republican Party could endorse a candidate. Why would the party decide to do something like this? And there's been a little bit of some pushback among the candidates. A Republican candidate for a governor in this election, John Cox, called it trickery, political scheme, moving the goalposts, and said that he wouldn't even take part in the process. And even the Faulconer campaign said that this could divide the party. What say you about that?
Well, when we first started this process, one of our biggest concerns was that a legitimate Democrat would, have the courage to get into this race. And so we're in a very different place than we were when the process started. There was not a process for the Republican Party to endorse in this, regardless of how many Republicans or how many Democrats were in the race. So one, it's a threshold of 60% that an individual has to get to receive the endorsement of the entire delegation. Two, there's still an option for no endorsement. But what I didn't want to do was I didn't want a few members of the delegation deciding for us that what the entire delegation would do. And so having a process in which the entire delegation has a voice was critical to me. And I'm always going to come down on the side of openness and transparency.
And just to point out before we leave here, latest count we have as of this week, it looks like Kevin Kiley, Kevin Faulconer, and Larry Elder have already hit that threshold that you talked about.
Yes, they are all eligible to be considered for endorsement next weekend.
California Republican Party Chairwoman Jessica Millan Patterson, we thank you for your time here on Inside California Politics.
Thanks, Nikki. Great to be with you.
Coming up, California is now requiring all state employees and healthcare workers to get vaccinated or submit to regular COVID-19 testing. Why the director of the California Department of Human Resources says this step is necessary.
COVID-19 case rates are going up across the country, and this week the state of California announced new measures to encourage state employees and healthcare workers to get vaccinated. The director of the California Department of Human Resources, Arena Ortega, explains the decision. Director Ortega, the governor came out this week with these new guidelines, these new requirements involving state workers, also healthcare workers in terms of proving vaccination or getting testing. So how does this plan work? Is it something like a vaccine passport?
So for state employees, up until now, we had been accepting a self-attestation of vaccination status, and that would allow you to be in the indoors in the workplace without a mask. That was before some of the mask orders came down from some of the counties. So with this new process, the new policy that we've announced, employees will be required to show evidence of their vaccination status. So that would mean they either need to access the digital record that's available, where they can pull down the QR code that tells you that the individual has been vaccinated, or they could bring in other evidence of vaccination, the paper record or some other medical record. With that self-attestation, the employee, to the extent that masks are not otherwise required, would be able to be unmasked, or the employee would be exempt from a testing protocol that we will be implementing as well.
And what does that proof of testing look like? How will you guys verify that?
The proof of testing, we are still working on the exact testing protocols for each department. So we have some places where testing has already been underway, where the testing is done on site, and so the individual makes an appointment, and the department is aware of the appointments that are being made for all of the individuals who are required to be tested. We will look at that as a potential option. It really depends on how the testing protocol is rolled out, how proof of testing will be implemented, but we absolutely intend to verify that the employee has in fact been tested.
What does it look like? What does a recourse look like if an employee says, look, I don't want to do this? Is there, a certain, 3-strike system, or will they face termination?
So for employees today, there are work requirements. So there are all kinds of rules that employees must follow in state employment, depending on the department that they work in. There may be different kinds of minimum requirements of their job. We always expect employees to follow those work rules. We give many paths to having employees comply with all rules, and including this one. If there is a medical or a religious reason why the employee cannot comply with cannot get vaccinated or cannot comply with the testing requirement, then we would follow our normal procedures to review that type of request for exemption. If the employee has no substantiated reason for an exemption, we will continue to work with them to get compliance with the rule. Ultimately, yes, the employee could be disciplined for not following the requirements. The disciplinary procedures are longstanding in state government. Each of our bargaining units has agreements on the types of discipline that can be applied, and department managers are quite familiar with the steps that would need to be taken to discuss employees who are not following work requirements.
There has been a little bit of pushback from one union, the head of SEIU Local 1000, the new president, Richard Lewis Brown, who just want to say has been very critical of the governor, came out in objection to this new requirement for employees, state employees, to prove vaccination or testing, sent an official letter to your department. Have you seen this letter, and what is your reaction to it?
We are in receipt of the letter. We will be meeting with SEIU through our normal procedures. We meet with them on all manner of topics, and so any objection like this, we will follow all normal procedures to have conversations with them about what their concerns are and address those concerns appropriately.
Lorena Ortega, Director of the California Department of Human Resources, we thank you for your time here on Inside California Politics.
Thank you.
Coming up, a one-on-one conversation with California's Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, the challenges she says her office is facing ahead of the September recall election. The September 14th recall election is coming up fast, and there is a lot for state officials to get done before Election Day. Capitol Insider Ashley Zavala spoke with Secretary of State Shirley Weber about what her office is doing to ensure a safe and transparent recall election.
We're joined now by California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber. Dr. Weber, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. In the last 6 months that you have stepped into this position, not only have you had to deal with, taking on the transition of the office, but also dealing with the logistics of this recall. So my first question for you is, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I mean, the good thing is that, in taking over the position, that there were already people in the office who are election people who know much more about elections than I do. And so they were ready for whatever we had to do. We've had a lot of special elections this year that were kind of unusual. And so we're still in the midst of special elections. And then we have the recall. So we were ready. They were ready. And I had read enough and had been guided enough by them that we're doing a really good job with it.
With that recall being the biggest special election in the state for the second time in the state's history, I'm wondering, what can voters expect moving in the next few weeks?
Well, I'm hoping in the next few weeks they will get a chance to experience the fact that this is a relatively simple yet very important election. And I say simple because it's not going to be cluttered with a lot of other kinds of things on the ballot. There'll be two questions asked on the recall ballot. And that's one, do you want to recall the governor? And two, if for some reason the recall passes, who would you pick as the replacement? And so it's a really simple ballot. And we're mirroring what we did back in the fall in terms of making sure that everyone gets a mailed ballot, because we're still in the midst of COVID and trying to socially distance and be responsible. So everyone will get a ballot to mail in. We'll have more days to vote. We'll also have voting centers and voting boxes. So they should expect to have the same kind of service that they had in the election in November. But it should be a simple election, and we're in the process of it now and getting ready to begin to mail out ballots and really move forward with the election.
Absolutely. And on September 14th, will we know the results of this election?
Well, we won't know the official results. It takes us 30 days to basically count every ballot to make sure that those ballots that came in, who were mailed in and arrived in our offices a week after, 7 days after the election, have to be counted. We had some provisional ballots that we'll have to basically examine signatures and make sure they're valid. So, the normal process occurs. We often, even with a regular election, you're not really sure in a finite way who won, but you have an idea. In other words, if you're winning by a huge margin and the only ballots left to really officially count are very small, then you pretty much can predict who the winner will be. But we're optimistic that September 14th, we will know, and we will officially know 4 weeks later in October.
Dr. Weber, you mentioned COVID earlier, and we're starting to see more federal, state, and local level guidance in some of our counties, and I'm wondering how that might affect in-person voting for those who do want to go to the polls on September 14th.
We will have the resources there to accommodate them, that are there. But, interestingly enough, all of our special elections that took place, the vast majority of ballots came in were absentee, were actually mail-in ballots or ballots that got dropped off. And we'll still have that opportunity to do that. And the same is true in the fall. So we will have the same kind of protocol and practices with regards to safe voting that we had in November. But we'll also have more opportunities to vote in terms of being able to vote earlier, being able to mail in your ballot, go to the drop boxes to deliver them, or go to certain places where people can deliver their ballots. So we'll have the same kind of security that we had before. And people felt that was a good thing, and we had a great turnout and no real incidents. And so we hope to have that same kind of response this time.
Dr. Weber, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, and make sure everybody go vote September 14th. We need you.
We will.
You can see more of our interviews online. Just head to your local station's website and click on Inside California Politics. Thank you for watching Inside California Politics.
We'll see you back here next weekend.